As Donald Trump once again tries to broker peace in the Gaza-Israel conflict, it's worth asking how successful were the US presidents before him. For nearly 5 decades, American presidents have thrown their full weight into this volatile arena, believing only Washington could bring lasting peace to the Middle East. Yet every peace plan seemed to collapse under the same pressure. Gaza. From Carter's grand visions to Clinton's last stand and Trump's transactional deals. This is the epic story of how America's pursuit of peace turned Gaza into its ultimate diplomatic battlefield. Number 1. We have Carter and the framework that failed the Palestinians. In the late 1970s, President Jimmy Carter embarked on one of the most ambitious peace efforts in modern Middle Eastern history. The Camp David Accords of 1978 brought together Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin for 13 intense days of secluded negotiations at the presidential retreat in Maryland. Carter's vision was monumental, ending decades of Arab-Israeli hostility and forging a roadmap toward a lasting peace in the region. While the Accords produced a historic peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, they failed catastrophically in addressing the Palestinian question. The framework for peace in the Middle East vaguely promised interim self-rule for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, but with no clear path to sovereignty or statehood. By sidestepping direct Palestinian participation, the US inadvertently delegitimized the Palestinian cause on the world stage. The United Nations General Assembly condemned the framework for excluding the very people it claimed to represent. The success of the Egypt-Israel treaty came at the price of fracturing the Arab coalition, isolating the Palestinians, and creating a precedent where peace talks could move forward without their consent or presence. Carter's diplomatic triumph thus became a moral and strategic failure for the Palestinian track, a moment that set the tone for decades American-led negotiations that prioritized achievable agreements over inclusive justice. At number 2, we have the Schultz Initiative, a roadmap for interim self-government. In the wake of the First Intifada, a massive grassroots Palestinian uprising in 1987, the Reagan administration found itself pulled back into Middle East diplomacy. Secretary of State George Shultz spearheaded a bold and structured plan in 1988, aiming to transform chaos into negotiation through a phased peace process. His proposal sought to bring together the world's major powers, including the UN Security Council's permanent members and all regional actors, in an international conference that would jumpstart talks between Israel and a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation. The blueprint envisioned a 3-year period of interim Palestinian self-government, a crucial first step before tackling permanent borders and sovereignty. Yet, the plan was crippled by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir's hardline refusal to discuss land for peace and the Soviet Union's distrust of a powerless conference. Despite its collapse, Schultz's framework introduced a revolutionary diplomatic concept using strict, time-bound phases to enforce progress. This notion of a negotiation timetable became the DNA of later peace efforts, including Oslo and the Roadmap. Even in failure, the Schultz Initiative forced the Palestine Liberation Organization to reconsider its strategy, leading Yasser Arafat to recognize Israel's right to exist and paving the way for the first direct US-PLO dialogue. Though forgotten by many, Schultz's diplomatic experiment laid the procedural foundation for future American-led negotiations, a meticulous attempt to engineer peace through deadlines and structure, rather than emotion and politics. At number 3, we have Bush Sr. and the door to direct talks. In the aftermath of the Cold War's end and the Gulf War's shifting alliances, President George H.W. Bush seized a rare geopolitical opportunity to reshape Middle East diplomacy. The Madrid Conference of 1991, co-sponsored by the United States and the Soviet Union, marked the first time Israel sat at the same table with all its neighboring Arab states and a Palestinian delegation. The event symbolized a turning point in regional diplomacy, bringing long hostile actors into a shared space of negotiation under American sponsorship. While the Palestine Liberation Organization could not officially sit at the table due to Israeli objections, its representatives operated behind the scenes, directing the Palestinian team's every move. The conference opened bilateral tracks for direct talks and multilateral discussions on refugees, water, and economic cooperation, laying a comprehensive foundation for future dialogue. Although initial negotiations stagnated under Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, the Madrid framework created political legitimacy for Palestinians and Israelis to speak directly. Ironically, It was the failure of Washington-based follow-up talks that pushed both sides to take diplomacy into their own hands, leading to the secret Oslo negotiations in Norway. The US, while not brokering the final breakthrough, had provided the crucial political umbrella that made such talks possible. The Madrid Conference thus stands as Bush Sr.'s quiet triumph, a diplomatic door left open, through which the first tangible steps toward mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO would eventually pass. At number 4, we have Clinton hosts hope. The Gaza-Jericho first breakthrough. Few moments in modern diplomacy were as electrifying as September 13, 1993, when President Bill Clinton stood at the White House lawn, flanked by Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, witnessing a handshake that many believed would reshape the Middle East forever. The signing of the Declaration of Principles, Oslo Accord, symbolized an unprecedented recognition. Israel formally acknowledged the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, while the PLO recognized Israel's right to exist and renounced terrorism. At the heart of this agreement lay the Gaza-Jericho First Plan, an experimental model granting Palestinians limited self-rule in the Gaza Strip and Jericho area before expanding to the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority was born, with Arafat assuming leadership, marking the first tangible form of Palestinian governance. Though the United States was not directly involved in the secret negotiations that produced Oslo, Clinton's decision to host the signing gave the agreement its symbolic legitimacy and global recognition. Yet beneath the fanfare lurked deep structural flaws. By isolating Gaza as a test case, largely because it lacked major Israeli settlements, the process inadvertently fragmented Palestinian geography and politics, planting the seeds of the future Gaza-West Bank divide. Gaza became a political laboratory where the idea of limited autonomy was tested but never expanded equitably. The US-backed celebration thus masked a quiet tragedy, a peace built on administrative compartmentalization rather than territorial continuity, setting the stage for the divisions that would haunt every subsequent peace effort. At number 5, we have solidifying control, Oslo II and the partitioning of the territories. 2 years after the emotional triumph of Oslo I, President Clinton once again became the host of history in September 1995, when the Oslo II interim agreement was signed at the White House. This new accord attempted to transform the hopeful principles of Oslo I into an operational framework for governance and security across the West Bank and Gaza Strip. For the first time, the territories were divided into the infamous areas A, B, and C, a system of layered sovereignty that dictated the contours of Palestinian life. Area A granted the Palestinian Authority full control over major cities. Area B allowed for shared jurisdiction, and Area C, comprising over 60% of the West Bank, remained under exclusive Israeli control. The Gaza Strip, though nominally under Palestinian civil authority, remained encircled by Israeli military oversight. Clinton's visible presence, joined by King Hussein of Jordan and President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, symbolized the enduring global belief that peace was within reach. Yet beneath the celebratory surface, Oslo II institutionalized territorial fragmentation, replacing the dream of a contiguous state with a patchwork of enclaves. The deal's intricate maps and administrative layers created permanent zones of friction that hindered mobility, governance, and security. While the US hoped this step-by-step process would lead to statehood, it instead entrenched a reality of dependence and disconnection, giving hardliners on both sides new tools to stall and sabotage progress. The Clinton administration's drive for managed peace inadvertently created a system so complex that it became nearly impossible to dismantle, locking the Palestinian quest for sovereignty in bureaucratic gridlock. At number 6, we have the Wye River Bridge, last-ditch effort to save Oslo. By the late 1990s, the Oslo peace process was on life support. President Bill Clinton, determined not to let his signature foreign policy initiative collapse, threw himself into a grueling week of high-stakes diplomacy at the Wye River Plantation in Maryland. Sitting down with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Chairman Yasser Arafat, Clinton acted less as a host and more as an on-site mediator, pushing both leaders toward compromise. The resulting Wye River Memorandum 1998 revived commitments from previous Oslo agreements. Most importantly, additional Israeli troop withdrawals and enhanced Palestinian security cooperation. Clinton's personal touch extended beyond the negotiation table. He made history by becoming the first sitting U.S. president to visit Gaza, addressing the Palestinian National Council and witnessing the formal revocation of anti-Israel clauses in the PLO Charter. This unprecedented moment briefly restored confidence in the process, portraying America as the indispensable broker of peace. Yet the cost of that success was telling. The fact that it required direct presidential involvement to enforce previously signed commitments exposed the systemic fragility of the Oslo framework. Rather than a sustainable path to peace, Oslo had become a series of U.S.-supervised deadlines, dependent on the pressure of American diplomacy rather than genuine reconciliation between the parties. The Wye River effort was both a triumph of persistence and a revelation of weakness, a reminder that no amount of presidential charisma could substitute for the absence of mutual trust and political will. At number 7, we have Camp David II, Clinton's last stand and the Second Intifada. In July 2000, President Bill Clinton launched what would become the most ambitious and emotionally charged peace summit of his presidency, the Camp David II Summit. For 15 tense days, Clinton personally mediated between Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat, pushing to resolve the final status issues left unfinished by Oslo: borders, refugees, settlements, and Jerusalem. The talks produced a historic, though fragile, offer proposals for a Palestinian state encompassing Gaza and approximately 95% of the West Bank. Yet the summit collapsed over the intractable question of sovereignty over the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, in Jerusalem. Barak insisted Israel retain sovereignty while Arafat refused to cede control over Islam's third holiest site. When the summit failed, the optimism of the 1990s peace era disintegrated overnight. Within months, the Second Intifada, Al-Aqsa Intifada, erupted, marking a violent backlash born of disillusionment and despair. Clinton's final gamble on peace instead became a catalyst for renewed bloodshed, undermining Palestinian faith in negotiations and empowering militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The U.S. narrative that followed, portraying Arafat as the intransigent party, further eroded trust and crushed Israel's once robust peace movement. What was meant to deliver a final peace instead delivered division. The fragmentation of the PLO, the militarization of Palestinian politics, and the political vacuum that allowed Hamas to rise. Camp David II stands as a tragic turning point, where diplomacy reached for history and instead unleashed chaos that would redefine Gaza's fate for decades to come. At number 8, we have the roadmap Bush Jr. and the failure of the quartet. In 2003, amid the ruins of the Second Intifada, President George W. Bush unveiled a bold new vision, the Roadmap for Peace, drafted and managed by the Quartet, the US, UN, EU, and Russia. It promised a two-state solution and the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state by 2005, structured around a three-phase, performance-based plan. The obligations were clear. Palestinians were to dismantle militant groups and end violence, while Israel was to freeze all settlement activity, halt home demolitions, and withdraw from occupied areas. However, both sides faltered before Phase 1 even concluded. The Palestinian Authority failed to curb militant attacks, while Israel continued expanding settlements and employing punitive demolitions, especially across Gaza. The quartet's multilateral design, meant to share accountability, instead produced diffused responsibility and no enforcement power. Washington's refusal to treat Israel's legal obligations like halting demolitions and settlement growth as non-negotiable further doomed the effort. By turning compliance into political bargaining, the roadmap allowed non-compliance to become the diplomatic default. The U.S. found itself trapped in a procedural cycle of unmet benchmarks and eroding credibility. The plan's ultimate collapse underscored the limits of process-driven peacebuilding when political will is absent. It also set the stage for the Gaza disengagement, as Israeli leaders concluded that unilateral moves, not U.S.-brokered frameworks, were the only viable path forward. What began as a grand multilateral experiment in diplomacy ended as another symbol of paralysis, demonstrating that without enforcement, peace plans become nothing more than paper blueprints of lost intentions. Midpoint analysis, U.S. endorsement of the Gaza disengagement, 2004 to 2005. When Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon proposed his unilateral Gaza disengagement plan in 2004, President George W. Bush swiftly endorsed it, calling it real progress toward peace. Under the plan, Israel would withdraw all settlers and troops from the Gaza Strip, seemingly advancing Palestinian autonomy. Yet beneath the optics of withdrawal lay a strategic and diplomatic trap. In exchange for Gaza's evacuation, Bush issued a landmark letter recognizing the realities on the ground, namely that Israel would retain major settlement blocks in the West Bank. This statement shattered long-standing U.S. policy by effectively legitimizing Israeli territorial claims beyond the 1967 borders. While the disengagement removed Israel's physical presence from Gaza, it left the territory encircled and economically dependent, creating what many analysts described as a controlled isolation. Israeli intelligence officials even predicted that Hamas's rise would make Gaza easier to contain militarily. The Bush administration, seeking quick progress, mistook withdrawal for resolution. Instead, the move froze the peace process indefinitely and cemented Gaza's political separation from the West Bank. Within 2 years, Hamas seized full control of Gaza, fulfilling the very outcome Israel's security establishment had quietly anticipated. U.S. endorsement of unilateralism over negotiation marked the decisive departure from decades of American mediation and transformed Gaza from a test case for peace into a symbol of failed diplomacy. At number 9, we have Obama and the crisis mediator. By 2012, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had devolved into cyclical warfare rather than diplomacy. During Operation Pillar of Defense, Israel launched a major assault on Hamas targets in Gaza, following escalating rocket fire, threatening a full-scale ground invasion. President Barack Obama, prioritizing immediate de-escalation over long-term peace, dispatched Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to lead emergency shuttle diplomacy between Jerusalem, Cairo, and Ramallah. Working closely with Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi and leveraging Turkey's influence, the U.S. helped craft a ceasefire agreement announced on November 21, 2012. The truce halted hostilities and temporarily stabilized the region, earning international praise for averting a larger war. However, the episode revealed a dramatic shift in U.S. policy. Washington had become a secondary mediator, relying on regional actors like Egypt to communicate with Hamas, whom the U.S. officially refused to engage. This indirect diplomacy exposed the new geopolitical reality. Hamas was an entrenched governing force in Gaza, and the U.S. could no longer act as the sole honest broker. While the ceasefire temporarily restored calm, it underscored the fragmentation of U.S. influence and the deep political split between Gaza and the West Bank. The Obama administration's crisis management avoided another humanitarian catastrophe, but failed to restore any momentum toward a broader peace. America's role had shifted from architect of peace to firefighter of conflict, intervening only when the flames grew too large to ignore. At number 10, we have Trump's latest vision. In 2025, amid the aftermath of another devastating Gaza war, President Donald Trump returned to the global stage with a high-stakes hostage and ceasefire deal that momentarily reset the trajectory of U.S. diplomacy. Brokered with the help of Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and key Arab partners like Qatar, the agreement secured the release of hostages from Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, a surge in humanitarian aid, and a phased Israeli military withdrawal from much of the territory. But Trump's ambitions extended beyond a ceasefire. His proposed Peace to Prosperity Gaza reconstruction plan envisioned a technocratic, internationally funded administration led by vetted Palestinian figures, overseen by a U.S.-chaired board of peace. Wealthy Arab states were to bankroll Gaza's rebuilding, with eventual power transfer to a reformed Palestinian Authority. The initiative halted immediate violence and earned cautious praise for restoring the two-state conversation, as it explicitly rejected Israeli annexation of Gaza. Yet critics argued it was transactional diplomacy, substituting structural justice with short-term deals. The framework ignored key unresolved issues: Hamas's disarmament, Israeli security guarantees, and Palestinian political legitimacy. Netanyahu's immediate objection to PA involvement exposed the plan's fragility. While Trump's approach demonstrated unmatched deal-making urgency, it risked creating a governance vacuum filled by foreign appointees rather than elected representatives. Still, the agreement marked the first genuine pause in violence in years, reaffirming that even imperfect U.S. intervention could momentarily reshape Gaza's political landscape. Whether this truce becomes the foundation for peace or another fleeting illusion remains to be seen. For nearly 5 decades, every U.S. president has tried to reshape Gaza's fate, from grand peace frameworks to desperate crisis deals, yet each effort left deeper scars than solutions. America's power could open doors, but its short-term fixes often locked Gaza into long-term isolation. From Carter's exclusion to Clinton's collapse and Trump's transactional truce, every peace became another turning point in Gaza's struggle. As history shows, Washington's diplomacy built the stage but never delivered the peace. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into untold chapters of world history. Thanks for watching.